was Bryce Young forced on them because that was David Tepper's guy? And I think that's something that has to get answered, because I'm not sure there's a pathway forward for the franchise if David Tepper doesn't take a step back and stay out of
100%
football business.
100%. And yes, I'm concerned. That's the most concerning thing about Carolina moving forward. It's not figuring out quarterback. It's can they survive with this clown of an owner? That's probably the worst owner in professional sports.
What?
Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
One thing that I'd love to talk about with you today is focusing in on these teams that are 0-2 and teams that are 2-0, because there is a big difference in that. In fact, these 0-2 teams are in trouble. Since the NFL expanded the playoff field to 14 teams in 2020, 0-2 teams are not making the postseason. There's been 32 teams since 2020 to start 0-2, and only 2 of them have made the playoffs: the 2023 Texans and the 2022 Bengals. Now, the Bengals are back in that boat because they're always back in that boat. But that's not a great rate, Brett Whitefield. That's 6.3%. That's your chance of doing this. That includes the expanded 14-team playoff field. And so what I'd love to do to get things started today is examine these 0-2 teams. And we'll get to the 2-0 teams. Congratulations to you guys. But these 0-2 teams in particular, because there's some surprises along the way. And see, if you find optimism or not. But I feel like the right 0-2 team to start with is the Carolina Panthers, because obviously they've made a big choice here to bench Bryce Young. And Brett, my initial thought on this was, man, you gave up so much to get Bryce Young. Don't you just kind of have to play him and let him figure it out or not figure it out and just declare whatever he's going to be in the NFL, especially after an offseason, let's face it, where you did everything you could to give him an opportunity? You hired the coach that's supposed to help. Did Geno Smith wonders in Seattle, Baker Mayfield. You went out and gave $100 million to Robert Hunt to play guard. You gave Damian Lewis big money to play left guard. You trade for Deontay Johnson. You trade into the first round for Xavier Leggett. You draft young playmakers at tight end and running back, Brooks and Jatavion Sanders. I mean, you have done so much. You fired Frank Reich quickly because you didn't feel like he was the guy for Bryce Young. You have done everything to this point to give Bryce Young an opportunity. And my thought was, boy, you better let this play out and let him declare himself one way or another. But then I thought a little bit more about it, Brett. And I thought to myself, you know what? There's 52 other players on that roster. And you owe it to them to give yourself a chance to go out and win. And let's be honest, Bryce Young's not giving you that opportunity. And there's careers on the line. And this is a young coach in Dave Canales that if he's not going to play his best players, he's going to lose that team quick. You got to be able to win. I know that everybody loves the idea of, oh, well, the best thing for this team is to have a high draft pick and have these assets. Is it? Or is the best thing to try to establish a culture of winning football games so that there's buy-in from your locker room? Very complicated situation, but I've landed on that. I don't think Bryce Young's a playable quarterback, and I think Dave Canales made the heart-right decision.
Ooh, this is tough. I mean, I agree from play on the field. Yeah, it's obviously the right decision, right? It's been bad, man. And what's even crazier, Joe, so week 1, you had the tape you had, and then you come back week 2, and you're thinking Bryce Young's going to make some adjustments. And the adjustments he made were he just wasn't going to throw the ball downfield at all. And the problem with that is he was still putting the ball in harm's way on, every third throw, it felt like. I think his ADOT in this game was under 3. So, he can't even he wasn't even functioning as a guy just taking dinks and dunks. It was really concerning. So I do think this is the right call. And it doesn't necessarily mean that Bryce is done forever. I think that's obviously the writing. It's not good. And I would say there's a significant chance he's done forever. But I know there's a Panthers beat yesterday who was reminding us of John Elway getting benched after 5 starts. Joe Namath, I think, was the other one, got benched after 2 starts. No, sorry, Terry Bradshaw. Terry Bradshaw was the other one, got benched after 2 starts. Elway, those cases are out there. They exist. Don't think Bryce Young's turning into either of those guys. But bigger point being, it doesn't mean he's necessarily done. But the bigger thing for me is, like you said, the 52 other players on the roster. You have to be able to evaluate them. This is a young team, right? There's a lot of turnover going on. You have a young coach, relatively new GM. They're trying to figure it out. They have to know where their roster stands going into next year. And the only way to evaluate that legitimately is with Andy Dalton at quarterback, unfortunately. And there's a really solid chance, Joe, they're picking first overall again. Like, really solid chance. So, that puts them in the market for a QB, obviously.
I'm interested to see what type of fight this team shows the rest of the way. But we saw last year in the NFC, 2, 3, and 6 teams make the playoffs, and a 4 and 7 team win that division, right? The Bucs.
Yep.
So I think you have to look at it through that perspective, and you do have veterans on defense. I mean, you brought in a lot of veterans to this football team. So for as young as it is, I mean, there's still a Jadeveon Clowney and a Deontay Johnson and an Adam Thielen and a Taylor Moton, and there's vets on this roster. And so Shaq Thompson's on this roster. I'm not optimistic, but I think they have a much better chance to win football games with Andy Dalton. And a lot of people liked Bryce Young, Brett Whitefield. A lot of people did. A lot of people thought this was the right thing for Carolina. This was going to be their answer to be their franchise quarterback. You and I didn't align with that throughout the scouting process. And so I think a lot of the way that you feel about Bryce Young and where he goes from here is rooted in what you thought of him as a prospect. If you thought he was going to be Steph Curry in this point guard that's going to distribute the football and make plays and occasionally, get off script and be dynamic and do the things that he flashed at Alabama, then you're thinking to yourself, okay, well, it's just a matter of time. If you're like myself, who saw an unbelievably limited player that has no size, no arm talent, limited athleticism, very, very, very delayed processor, right? I saw way too many flaws for me to believe that this guy was going to be a franchise quarterback, and those receipts exist prior to this moment.
Yep.
Then you're like, yeah, okay, well, I told you so. But I still am surprised that there were such wide-ranging viewpoints on a player like this. And I understand that there generally is with any player. But from one side of the spectrum thinking, I don't think this guy has a path, to, yeah, this team should give up everything to get this guy to be their quarterback. That's such a wide range. And people that I really respect that evaluate quarterbacks were in on Bryce Young, and I've been confused ever since.
I'm not going to sit here and say I was out on Bryce Young, but I definitely, in the context of what the Panthers were doing, for me, it was like, well, if you're trading up to 1 overall, you have to swing for the fences. You got to go upside. For me, it was Richardson. I also made the argument it should be C.J. Stroud at the time. Richardson, I had ahead of Stroud. But either way, both those guys have a lot of ability that extends beyond just where they were at the time. Like, there was a developmental pathway there for them, those guys to be awesome, where you and I both just didn't really see that with Bryce. So the limitations were so obvious to me. So I honestly don't understand the decision. There, obviously, you have the whole ownership angle to this too, right, Joe? I really want to know what happened. Was who was the coach before Canales? Why am I blanking?
Matt Rule.
Was Matt Rule forced to take, or was that administration forced to?
Well, I'm so sorry. It was Frank Reich. Frank Reich. Yeah.
Yes.
You forget him. He was only there for 11 games.
Yeah. Was Bryce Young forced on them because that was David Tepper's guy? And I think that's something that has to get answered, because I'm not sure there's a pathway forward for the franchise if David Tepper doesn't take a step back and stay out of
100%
football business.
100%. And yes, I'm concerned. That's the most concerning thing about Carolina moving forward. It's not figuring out quarterback. It's, can they survive with this clown of an owner? That's probably the worst owner in professional sports. The last layer of this conversation I think is important for Carolina is being mindful of the steps that they did and did not take since the wheels fell off Cam Newton, right?
Oh.
They chose not to participate in drafting a quarterback multiple years in a row when they were in position to do so.
Yeah.
And then for you to finally have the moment that we're going to get this quarterback and give up all that we did for a guy that, whether you could have been the biggest Bryce Young stan that ever existed, you had to be mindful of the limitations that existed and the pathway for him not being a thing. And I understand that exists with any quarterback, but especially for an outlier like Bryce Young.
100%. I mean, shoot, we're already seeing the tweets of the trade, what the Bears got versus what the Panthers got in that trade. It's very ugly.
Let's focus a little bit on the AFC. I think you have two teams here in the AFC North, in the Baltimore Ravens and the Cincinnati Bengals, that are both 0-2. And I mean, both 0-2 because they lost the game to the Chiefs, but the Ravens went on to lose to the Raiders, and we saw the Bengals lose to the Patriots. So, like, for as much as the Chiefs appear to be a quality loss, the other ones are not so quality. The Ravens, is this offensive line just going to be too much for them to overcome, and they don't really have a clutch factor? What are you thinking in Baltimore right now?
Yeah, I mean, I don't love it. I thought the pass protection in week 2 was a lot better than week 1, but the run game was still tough. You know, it took a while for Henry.
It's muddy.
It's muddy, and everything looks chaotic. I think after Henry's first 10 carries in this game, he had like 3 yards. After his first 5, he had -4 or something like that. Like, it was an uphill battle all day to get anything going. I do think this is problematic. They, for whatever reason, Lamar Jackson also doesn't trust Rashad Bateman to be his number 2. Bateman's open a lot. Like, I'm diving deep into the film. You know, obviously we have the ass scores that are going to come out later today. But man, he's not trusting what he's seeing, and Bateman is winning his routes at a very high rate. Nothing downfield. I think Lamar's ADOT in this game again was under 8. So I mean, this is tough, man. I don't really know what's going on there. It's the offensive line has issues for sure, but Lamar's traditionally overcome stuff like that with his mobility. Defensively, you know, their pressure rate is in the tank. They're not getting home on the quarterback. You kind of excuse some of that when you're playing Patrick Mahomes, right? But then you go do it again in week 2. Seems like a trend. I think that's a bad recipe. You can't really pass the ball and you're not getting home on the quarterback. Like, you're limiting the upside potential of both your offense and your defense.
Yeah, no deep stuff. The screen game's not working for him right now. Play action rates are low, you know, and so if you're just going to run the ball and have Lamar be a drop back passer, I don't know, man. I don't know if that's going to work out well for you. So the Ravens 0-2, the Bengals 0-2. That's par for the course for Cincinnati, but I thought they showed more fight against Kansas City. I think in some ways you're encouraged with that perspective, but they're in a hole.
Oh, I was massively encouraged in this game. Joe Burrow kind of looked back. He was competing. He was out there, you know, doing everything he could to will his team to victory. Obviously, they fell short, but you got contributions from Mike Gesicki and Jermaine Burton, and I think those are nice complementary pieces they'll need down the stretch to get out of the hole, right? And so when T. Higgins comes back, you know, Jamar Chase obviously very frustrated in this game. You know, it sounds like he's going to get a hefty fine for his antics in that game. But yeah, I was encouraged though, man. I feel like we saw some good signs of life, especially from Burrow. Like, the vibes after week 1 were bad, and then you know, kind of left week 2 feeling pretty good. So
I think maybe we overreacted to that Patriots game, right? There were the Bengals had, I think, 4 very costly drops.
Yeah.
And like, I think they have issues with some of their defensive line and stopping the run, but of all the 0-2 teams, I feel the best about them. Like, very comfortably the best about them. Ravens, Bengals, Jaguars, Titans, Colts, Broncos, Panthers, Giants, Rams. You feel the best about the Bengals, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to say the Ravens. They have a 2-time MVP at quarterback, right? But
you know, two-time MVP.
I threw that in there just for you, just
to
rub salt into that wound. But
I'm not even saying Josh should have won it last year, but it shouldn't have been Lamar.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Brock Purdy or something, like anything else would have been fine.
It's freaking Dak. Dak statistically was unreal last year.
Sure. Yeah.
The Bengals have Trey Hendrickson as well. And he he down the stretch last year. Actually, you look at the on-off splits for that Bengals defense last year with Hendrickson, they're wild. But holy crap, he dominated this game. He literally took over this game and wrecked several drives for Kansas City.